Honey, I blew up the business.
Welcome to the podcast. We've got Better Lucca on the line.
Hello.
Lovely to see you.
Great to see you too, Dan.
It is lovely to see you. I've had a really good week this week and I'm feeling full of energy, and I'm even more full of energy because Better has got an incredible entrepreneurial story, and she's full of beans and full of creativity and full of excitement and a good energy. So I'm feeling good about this podcast. So we're recording on a Friday and I'm excited about going into the weekend with this one under my belt. So welcome. Nice to see you. Better is what she describes as a multi-creative entrepreneur. She's a founder of a BAFTA award-winning games company, Bossa Games, co-founder. I'm going to interject here. You may or may not know this, Better. I'm a member of BAFTA because of video games, and I helped set up the BAFTA Video Games Awards back in the early noughties.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
So I used to own a branding agency. We used to do a lot of work in the video games industry, and we worked with BAFTA to set up the Video Games Awards, and we were the official brand partner for about 4 or 5 years. So I know those guys really well, and I know the games industry well, not as well as you, but I'm pleased to see that you're kind of got your BAFTA. That's very good.
Yeah, no, and it's I think it has such an importance for the games industry, because we don't have the Oscars, we don't have anything as glamorous as, TV and films, right? And the moment that the BAFTA games started to happen, we all kind of, now we can have a celebration for the art and the science and the technology we're creating.
Yeah, no, it's great. And it was kind of, it's a great industry, the games industry. It's full of really, really great people who are kind of creative and interesting and courageous and fun. And I love very much working in that industry. But so Better is also an investor in multiple startups, a YouTuber with her channel Inspired to Start, and a podcaster with her podcast Hyper Curious, and an international public speaker, not just in the UK, all over the world.
All over the world, yes.
And her mission is helping and inspiring ambitious entrepreneurs starting out. And it's actually, I've got to tell you, I am getting a lot of value from your talks and videos because I've been stalking you on the internet in preparation for the podcast, and I've been really
glad to hear.
Yeah, no, really, I've been really kind of getting into your YouTube videos. They're really great and they're very well produced and really full of great content. I've been self-employed for 20 years, and I'm getting good information from you. So thank you. She's been listed in the Forbes top 50 women in tech and featured in the BBC News, Sky News, Marie Claire, and the Financial Times. But the pinnacle of her career so far is appearing as a judge and angel investor on the BBC One's The Apprentice, where you were judging the contestants had done a video game. Now, I've got to thank you for this because I have 3 daughters, teenage daughters, and They have zero interest in my work life and my podcast until today.
They watched it and they watched
The Apprentice.
Amazing.
And I was like, you never guess what? You know that games thing? There was the woman who was on the panel. She's on my podcast, and now I have finally impressed my 15-year-old daughter, who's actually impressed with this today. So she's very impressed with you.
She's going to be listening to us. Good.
I hope so. So already you've made my life better. So great. All good.
I'm glad.
I'll remind everybody the podcast is brought to you by my company, the one I blew up, the tech department, which is still going and going strong. The whole point of the podcast is to help other entrepreneurs like you listening to avoid the silly mistakes I made to blow up my company. So if you want to help us on that mission, which is what Better is doing with her sort of mission, and then please share the podcast, tell your friends about it, rate us on Apple Podcasts particularly. And the more we do that, the more that gets out there and we can help people. So do a good thing, help us help other entrepreneurs like you. Right, let's get into it. I'm really intrigued to hear your entrepreneurial journey. But I want to start with the actual journey that you took at a point in time in your career where things were really looking good for you. You'd graduated from university in Brazil, your home country. You had a very excellent career in the corporate businesses, doing interesting work. You said you had a really great flat in Rio and a nice life, but then you left all that behind to come to London. So I was interested to know what was going through your mind as you got on that flight to London. How are you feeling?
I'm going to go back to how I was feeling when I was packing, actually, because I think that said it all about how I operate. And I can only see now, right, when I look backwards. And I remember I was looking at the kind of the items that I had in my flat, and like my rollerblades and like my, you know, the stuff that I tried in my life. And I had all sorts of, you know, I tried a lot of different sports in the past, and like reading documents and stuff that I wrote about life, lyrics that I wrote when I was like 15 years old. And as I was going through that and feeling very emotional, I was feeling that kind of that fire in my belly, that I was about to jump into something completely different, and something that felt very scary, but very exciting, and kind of having a blank space, right, to start anything, to do anything that I wanted. And I think that says it all about my drive for this adventure and to try new things in my life, this kind of risk-taking approach to life. And I probably got from my mom, because she's done that. She kind of left home and said, okay, I'm going to work when all of the women are just being mothers at home and not working. So she's being very much of an inspiration for me. But the moment that I got here, that's when things kind of synced in my brain and was like, oh my God, what have I done? I'm not sure I will be able to get a job as soon as I wanted, because my English is really bad. So I think my life says it all about how I roll. I throw myself into things because that's my nature. And then I learn on the job. And I fail a lot until I get to the point that I feel that I'm succeeding at something. So.
Wow. Yeah, so you were you threw yourself on a plane, threw yourself into the UK. You sort of stumbled out of the plane into the mean streets of London town. And here you are, kind of fresh, not speaking the language super great. And you're sort of heading into this unknown, the adventure. So I heard you say that the first 6 months, though, when you landed. So we can look back now and call it an adventure, and you can see that and put it into perspective. And we can see failure as a strategic good thing. But you said the first 6 months was really, really horrible, were the words you used. So what was happening in that first 6 months, and what was, you've thrown yourself into it, but how are you feeling in that first 6 months?
I felt very constrained, very limited, because communication is something that has been very present for me. So I communicate through the stuff that I wear, the words that I use. I love engaging with people and having deep conversations with people. So to me, worse than not having a job straight away, which was, my imagination was like, I'm going to get there. I'm going to do some interviews. I had some stuff lined up and I'm going to get a job in no time. It was very much the opposite. It was like, you're not only not having a job, but you also going back to trying to do the basics in your life, right? Which is to communicate. So I felt quite constrained in my voice and the way that I show myself in the world, right? I couldn't recognize myself. And so I had, a moment I was very much depressed. And I was like trying to get out of that and say, no, I'm here for a purpose and I'm going to fulfill that. And I literally enrolled myself in a full-time English course. And at the end of the course, I got a recommendation from the owner of the course saying that she was very impressed by the speed that I got from very basic English to advanced, because there was probably something inside me that was so desperate to succeed and to get out of that I just learned in no time. And I got to the other side, and I ended up getting a job. And actually, when I moved to the UK, I first went to Cambridge. So I got a job in Cambridge, and and then eventually got another job in London and moved to here and worked at Nokia and etc. And then we can go into the rest of the story. But I think the feeling was this mixture of hugely disappointed with myself, depressed because, I couldn't communicate, but also a lot of more energy to go to the other side and to get to out of the turbulent times and and survive.
No, it's interesting. So with hindsight now, looking back at that time, that kind of period of time where you're trying to survive, just to use your word there. It's like, what do you think you learned from that? You're looking back, and we can see again. It's interesting because people's stories always, sometimes they pan out and things work out, but in the time it's really dark and hard, and you're feeling a kind of afraid, and you don't know it's going to pan out. But so what do you think you've learned from that? Those kind of feelings at that time.
It's a good question, and it's great. The questions that you're asking me are very unique. By the way, I usually don't go that deep into that moment in my life, so thank you for that. What I learned, I think, when I look back right now, is that I learned that nothing can be as bad in life. You're not gonna die. You're not gonna, there's not gonna be a lion in the jungle that's gonna eat you alive. Everything is overcomeable. You can overcome your worst self, your worst moment. And of course, in the moment, it's really, really hard because you cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel. But once you do and you look back, you're like, well, actually, it was only 6 months. That 6 months felt like an eternity, but it was just 6 months in 90, 100 years that I'm going to live in planet Earth, hopefully. So yeah, things feel much more diminished. And I think it prepares you for the future, for you to kind of go back into that emotion and say, okay, I'm feeling this right now. It feels really bad. I'm failing again at something. It feels really bad. But I'm sure I'm going to overcome that because I proved to myself I've done it before.
Interesting. So there's a kind of, there's sort of proving to yourself you can keep going.
Yeah.
And kind of, it's funny, I've been thinking about this myself just for what it's worth, a little sidebar, but I've kind of, that ability to just keep going is quite a kind of, it's perhaps what I hear what you're saying. And I've had it, even recently, I've had some times where I've been feeling a bit low, my mood, and I've, just a bit of a funny kind of malaise, perhaps. And it's just, sometimes you just got to keep going. And for me, I'm talking about myself, ignore the perhaps negative emotions or fears or kind of anxieties that you're carrying in that moment. And just keep plodding on, and just, it's got a quite functional, actually. It's just, don't worry about all this noise in my own mind, but keep going on. Is that something you recognize in yourself?
Totally. I think when the moments that I burned out, that I got depressed, and, I had these episodes afterwards because, as an entrepreneur, you go to 100 miles per hour, right? And so to me, I get obsessed with something and I go. And so it's like, okay, I need to spend the whole week in bed because I'm completely depleted from energy, right?
Yeah.
I think, totally. I think that there's something about the muscle that you build in your brain that you feel that it's going to be okay. But when you are in the moment, you become very selfish, right? All you think is, oh my God, poor me, I'm in this horrible situation. So you lose perspective of what's outside. And one of the kind of the hacks, the tricks that I do nowadays when, to keep myself afloat and when I feel I'm going to be about to burn out, is to double down on my morning routines. Is to say, no, I will keep doing the exercise every day. I will spend at least 10 minutes meditating. I will eat a healthy breakfast because that grounds you. And suddenly you just cope with the tough moment much easier because you just allow that to happen, and you're not overthinking the overthinking, you know?
Yeah, that's just so funny you said all that, because I'm very similar. I run at 100 miles an hour and burn out and end up in bed for a week. That's kind of a repeat pattern in my life. I have a long history of blowing myself up. You know, this podcast theme is a theme throughout my life. Don't worry, I do it in personal and professional lives. And this isn't, by the way, just for the benefit of the audience, this is not something that happened 10 years ago and now it's all cool. Literally this week on Tuesday morning, I was with my wife. I was really I was diagnosed with depression about 8 years ago. So I have to manage that. And I don't take medication now, but I've learned how to manage it. But I still live with it. It's very real, and I have to be very careful. And on Tuesday morning, I was really cool, a really great mood on all the weekend on Monday. And Tuesday morning, I was just through the floor with my mood, really very low. As low as I can remember for a long time. And I was with my wife, and we just like everything felt catastrophic, and I was down a hole, right? As it happened, it just didn't last very long. I kind of took some time out of the day and canceled some meetings, and sort of it got back on track. But to your point of the morning routine, I have a similar morning routine. And these kind of functional routines are the things that help me get back on track. Yeah. And now, listen, people have ups and downs, and they're higher and lower and whatever. Like, the point is that is a natural human condition. But the routine is the thing that gets you back on track, not the thinking. The thinking is the thing that put me in the hole.
Exactly. And when you're in the hole, you lose perspective, and then the practice of something that you don't need to think, right, actually puts you in a much better mood. And I have those days every now and then as well. And sometimes I can connect with the sun being out or not in London, which is like terrible to say that. But, you know, I'm from Brazil, so the sun really gives me a lot of energy. And yeah, so for anyone who's listening to us who have those moments, feel that you're not alone, that this happens to all of us, and especially high achievers. And the best you can do is to ground yourself. And you know what? When we were all going to the office, we all had some sort of a structure. So I remember when I changed the kind of my routine in the last couple of years, that I went from being full-time to becoming non-exec, I had this moment of everything felt a little bit chaotic, because I didn't have the structure of my day. I didn't have meetings that I had to attend at 9 a.m. in the morning. So that also puts you in a different position. That allows you to be more creative with your days and more fluid with your days. But when you are in a down mood, it's really tough to get out of that. So the routine does help.
That's really interesting. And actually, let's go back to you mentioned Bossa there. I want to go back to the kind of story. Well, it's just like therapy for me, this kind of stuff. I just get to share what's going on, and I feel better as a result. This is really great. Thank you for being my counselor today, Berta. This is great. But going back to the story, so you're in London, you're in Cambridge, then you're in London, and then you're kind of got this drive. And I think we'll come back to this theme of drive and burnout and ups and downs. But you've got this drive to learn the language, to put yourself out there, to get a job. But then you entered the world of entrepreneurship. Can you tell us how that came about, and how you kind of started your company?
I've been always like a rebel and a challenger inside a large organization. So, you know, the word BHAG, right? The big, hairy, ambitious projects goals that companies have, like the skunk works or whatever. So I was always in that position that my bosses were like, Roberta, there you go, just go and do magic with this, right? And I love taking those things. And I say that I used to be hated by a lot of my colleagues, because they were all like, but why are we going to change? Like, but we should just be doing what we've been doing forever. Why this? Why changing, right? But that really gave me a lot of thrill. But I never, for a long time, I was afraid of throwing myself into a situation that I was actually the one driving, and there was no supporting system around me. And so at some point I got to a point I was working at Nokia Virtu, which was the luxury division of Nokia, like very expensive mobile phones. And I was commuting for like an hour and a half, because it was southwest of London. And I started to think to myself, what am I doing? What is my purpose in life? It's like, am I, here to help sell more mobile phones? Maybe that's not really what I want to do in my life. And I started to talk to two friends of mine who had been making video games for, EA and Jagex and a lot of different companies for their whole lives. And they're like, hey, we're thinking of opening a studio, and it would be amazing. You have such a complementary skill set in marketing and like connecting with millions of people, which is what I did at Global TV back in Brazil and what I was doing at Nokia. And, being like this entrepreneur that you've been always in your lifetime. How about we do something together? We're like, okay, count me in. Let's make this happen. And I started to work on that on my weekends and my evenings. So it was literally being, non-stop working, doing the job during the day to get my salary there until the company took off like 6 months down the line. So that transition was, it was almost like, I wouldn't say it was fluid, but I think somehow I was getting prepared to do that during my lifetime in big corporations. And then when the right opportunity came, I just jumped in and I said, okay, let's do this, see what happens.
And so this was about 12 years ago, is that right?
12 years ago.
And you had some co-founders, there was a team of you, and you went off to set up a games company, which you weren't from that industry, but you had transferable skills. And and so what happened when you launched the business?
So we started like, it was literally, three of us co-founders and another 3 people, whatever, working with us in a very tiny studio in East London. And it was actually, it's an interesting story because it was a circus space. So it was a space where people learn how to do trapeze and, become circus professionals. And we were working until like 11 p.m., 11:30 in the evening. And sometimes they were about to shut down the building. And then they would open our door and like suddenly there was a clown looking at us like, hey guys, we're gonna close now. And we're like, oh my God, okay, after the heart attack, let's go home. So we started very scrappy and doing our own thing and creating our own games, and also providing consultancy to other agencies in London to get, of course, cash flow, until the moment that we raised funds with a TV group called Shine Group, which owned IPs like MasterChef, The Biggest Loser, and hundreds of others across the globe. And they said, hey, we want to invest in a company that is the future of entertainment, which is, games. And we were doing Facebook games at the time, which was called social games. Like people might remember the Farmvilles of this world. And then we said, okay, let's go into this journey together. We got investment from them, and then the company started to take off. We were working on Monster Mind, which was our first game, which eventually we won a BAFTA award for.
Amazing. So this is kind of proper bootstrapping, scrappy, and then until you got that investment of funds and you got this BAFTA, and you got you're on the scene. You've made a name. You're out there, and so you've taken a non-executive role now at the business. Can you give us a sketch of what that kind of period from the BAFTA award and to this point of you taking a perhaps less active role day to day? What did that look like in terms of the evolution of Bossa Studios?
Wow, yeah, it's been like a lot of pivots, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of near-death experiences. We grew the company to about 80 people. So we're not super huge, but it's a good size of a team. We raised $30 million in total over these years, got some pretty good VCs on board, like Atomico, which was set up by the original founder of Skype, London Venture Partners, Makers Fund, who invest in like interactive entertainment. So it's been really, really good ride. And we launched dozens of games, and the way that we operate is very much like we fail a lot to succeed at a few games. So we've created like 300 games over the last 12 years, launched dozens of them, and dozens of them, I would say. And 3 of them became multi-million-dollar successes. So it's kind of a funnel. And I just, at some point, you go through the moment of the pandemic and you're like, what am I doing right now? I was already branching out to do a lot of things, because at certain moments I felt lonely, I felt burnout, all the stuff that you feel when you're growing a high growth startup. But I started to go into things like, I'm going to do improvisation theater classes. I'm going to do stand-up. I'm going to do fashion design courses. I was literally branching myself out into different things. And eventually I felt that for me, doing just one thing full time is not what makes me the most fulfilled and the most energized and giving the most out of me, right? And the pandemic kind of accelerated that. And we were in a point in the business that we had hired someone who's really good, COO, who became our co-CEO. And so he was already working, very nicely to professionalize everything that we did, like literally being the adult in the room of the startup, say, hey, let's just do things, in a more kind of a process manner other than, startup style. And to me, it was like the good moment to plan my transition as a non-exec, because then I open up my time to do all of the other things that I have been doing since then, like the YouTube channel, the podcast, the angel investing, keynote speeches. So all those things I became this multi, as I call it nowadays, which I get a lot of energy and output and good output when I have my fingers in many pies.
Yeah, interesting. There's a whole piece there around creativity and outside influences I'd kind of like to get into. But before we get into that, I'm so interested in this transition from you startup to successful startup to a business. There's a good independent 80 odd people in London doing things, and then you're kind of transitioning out of that, and this acceleration of that in the pandemic. And you already mentioned about working from home and how that kind of messed with your schedule, as it were, and messed with your mind. What was the impact of working from home for the team and for you, and how did you kind of handle that?
So we as a games company, we've always been highly techy on everything that we do, right? So and all the tools that everyone uses nowadays, Zooms and the Slacks and etc. and Jira, and everything was already in place. So the transition itself, from a practical perspective, was not that bad. I think the challenge was the culture. So we were heavily, our culture was very much around the office. It was all about that. We had activities going on a daily basis. We had like people doing music jamming because, they play instruments, people getting together for pizza, people getting together to play together, game jams, which is how we create new games. So it was very much office based. And so the transition was very challenging for us, because suddenly we had to question ourselves, right, as founders, what is the culture, the new culture that we want to create, to make sure that some of those things are transferred when people are alone, working alone at home, and of course having all of the bad news around them all the time. How can we support everyone to be their best selves and the best performers as they were before in the office, right? So I think that was quite challenging for me and the whole management team, for us to figure out how to recreate the culture. And I'm sure that we probably didn't do made all the right decisions, right? So I'm sure we probably made some bad decisions along the way, but I think the right intention was always to think, okay, how can we support people the best way possible? How can we make their lives much easier like by providing everything. We like literally send them desks and like chairs and computers, and everything was sorted out for them. So they didn't need to think about that and transition the best way possible. But I think the big challenge for us and for all startups is actually how do you create a culture where people are not feeling alone, and you do not start creating silos, because not everyone's going to talk to everyone every day as people used to by just, seeing somebody else at the kitchen, right?
That's true. We've had this issue actually, because we went fully remote in my company through lockdown, and same thing, very technically capable. Funnily, our culture seemed to be okay. It was just like we had to get really much tighter on process. So the silo thing, like people weren't talking, and that became the issue, was like the kind of lack of easy communication between things. And so we had last year, a couple of like bumps and scrapes purely to do with that one. We'd really underestimated that. So it's interesting that you had a similar experience. And so you've kind of you're coming out of Bossa from a day-to-day point of view, obviously still involved with, as you say, dealing with the culture and the handover. You mentioned that the company had pivoted a lot. I'm curious, or had lots of ups and downs and failures and near-death experiences. Out of your near-death experiences, which is in hindsight, your favorite near-death experience?
Oh my God. Okay, let's choose one. So we had after we launched our second game, so Mastermind, we won a BAFTA award, was like played by millions of people, was, seemingly very successful. But the reality was that we did not make as much money as we expected with that. So our monetization was not as good, as well-tuned as we wanted. So we had to eventually close down the game and then start other games and etc. So at some point, of course, you have to get cash coming in. So you get to the situation that, it might not last as long as you expected. And I remember there was a board meeting we had that everyone was already prepared that it was the decision-making moment that we would decide at the board meeting, are we closing the company or not? Because, we're trying our best to get cash in. And we entered the meeting and everyone was like tense, that tough moment, like very sad and very tense. We need to prepare everything. And there was a call that we were about to receive from a company that wanted to pay us to do a game. So we usually say work for hire, which is basically contracting us to do a game for them. And then halfway through the meeting, my co-founder receives the call. We stop the meeting, and then he goes out and he comes back in after the call, and we're all like, so is it a yes? Is it a no? and it was a yes. And we're like, okay, let's completely change the agenda of this meeting, because actually we now have something to work on in the company, and we can continue to with all of our plans. So that moment was very much near death, because it was a moment that we said, okay, that's it, we're done.
Wow. So if you'd have got that call like an hour later or 2 hours later or a day later, it could have been a whole different story.
It could have been, it's one of those sliding doors moments, right? So there's like, oh, okay, we're going that direction, not that. Yeah.
It's so amazing, and it's funny because it's so it is like how fate, call it, or how things pan out, and the timing of that is so incredible. Like, that how can that even just be a thing that would have happened? Like in the middle of the meeting, and the switch from we're kind of heading towards the precipice, and now we're not. And
yes.
And so just what happened to you? What emotions were you feeling when that call came in and your co-founder came in and said it's a yes? Like what happened to your emotions at that moment?
So the context to that was that we were pretty depressed over the previous couple of weeks, because we were like, damn it, that's it, that's over. And we had a series of conversations like, when at The Apprentice, the losing team go to that very horrible cafe and have those discussions. I had that with my co-founders. We went to a really terrible cafe. I was like, okay, because let's not spend too much money. Let's just, be very nimble here. And yeah, so there was like building up a lot of tension, a lot of emotions, a lot of sadness. I think we felt sad. We felt disappointed with ourselves. We felt that we felt like a failure, right? We felt like we were the failures, not the business was the failure. And that's, common to all entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, no, 100%.
You always put, the blame on yourself because, the bucket stops on you. And yeah, so that was what was building up. So the moment of the call was kind of, it was literally a new life. I think it's probably that's why I say near death, because it's probably when you breathe again, you're like, okay, things are fine. We can do it again. We have time to succeed now. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that feeling. I kind of I live those ups and downs, and it's a part of the challenge. Actually, you actually tweeted a tweet from of somebody, a great teacher of mine, a guy called Naval Ravikant.
Yeah, he's awesome.
If anybody's not checked out Naval, at Naval on Twitter, but there's a great book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, which somebody's collated his sort of thinking in tweets. He's a brilliant kind of philosopher, king of Silicon Valley. But he said, you retweeted, choose the non-emotional response to any given situation and see how much easier your life becomes. And I saw that and I thought, yeah, because often I have struggled with this. Like I've had super high highs, and as I described this week, super low lows. And part of my challenge is to sort of bring those two closer together. So it's less high, less low, perhaps. It's like so. And it's interesting because this emotional switch from depression in the crappy cafe to elation. We're back, life and death. Now, again, what have you learned from that in terms of managing your emotions?
I think, that's a good question. I don't think I don't want to change that. I think that's what makes great entrepreneurs. It's like, it's the same question about regret. People say, oh, so what did you regret in your life? I refuse to talk about regret, because all of those things, they are there for a purpose. And they are terrible when they happen, but they form you. They are the building blocks of your personality, the building blocks of how you're going to impact the world, and the building blocks of your future self. So I don't want to change as much as I want to have more of a balance, as you're saying. I agree with you. I'm on the same kind of thinking. How do I become less emotional about things? This is what makes great entrepreneurs. This is what gets us out of bed and become obsessed. This is what makes Elon Musk, right? It's like, it's not enough for running all those companies. Now let's impact communication in the world by owning Twitter. And he's nonstop, and love it or hating him, right? It's a trait of great entrepreneurs that you go for it and you don't really care if you're going to crash or not, because you want to have a different impact in the world.
Yeah, it's irrational, on many levels, right? And I think it's funny because as I said that actually about the highs and the lows, I'm like, in some ways I have this propensity to experience life very, very high. Like I have incredible peak experiences and these depths. And it's funny, like managing that or being okay with that. And maybe I don't want to flatten it, but I just need to be okay with it and learn to deal with that. But that kind of irrational drive, perhaps the irrational drive that sends a woman from Rio to Cambridge with no language skills and no plan kind of thing, is the drive that gets you through those situations. And it's interesting. I think that's like something where there's sort of spirit in that. And actually, this leads me on to your sort of creative side. Because I think for what it's worth, I went to art school. I was going to be a fine artist painter.
Really?
How cool. I dropped out and eventually run a tech company. So go figure. But I'm an artist, not a techie. right? Creative. And it's interesting. I now can say that because for many years I just said, well, I didn't go to art school, so I'm not an artist. But then I figured, hey, listen, why do I need a piece of paper? And I think there's a big parallel between artists and entrepreneurs, the kind of spirit, drive, vision, creative, stealing from the world and producing stuff. But I'm really interested to hear about, you went to do improv comedy and all this kind of different types of activity that's inspired you from a business point of view. But what did you learn from going into these different disciplines?
One thing that stays in my mind all the time is something that my teacher from stand-up comedy said to me. He said, "Look, I've been doing stand-up comedy for like decades, right? He trained like some of the best comedians in the UK, and I had nights that with the same set." I did like 3 gigs in the night, same set, different audiences, different time of the evening, of course, different levels of alcoholic levels on people's brains, right? But a couple of them, nobody cared, nobody laughed, nothing happened. And the other one was like the biggest show of my life. People absolutely adored it and they laughed at all the jokes, right? And that kind of gave the kind of the perspective to him that it really doesn't matter. So every time he goes on stage and he teaches this to us, right? You have, I'm going to swear now, you have to have this in your brain. Fuck it. Like, fuck it. It doesn't really matter. What matters is, are you doing something that you love? Are you doing something that you fulfill? Are you doing something that you believe? It really doesn't matter. The audience is the audience, and it's going to be another audience tomorrow. It's going to be another opportunity tomorrow or tonight, right? And I think that kind of realization put a lot of things in perspective for me as an entrepreneur. I went into a different route, a completely kind of opposite route to you. My first degree was computer science because, you know, in my household, there was no discussion of artistic things, you know, go and do something that will make you an independent woman and make you money, right? And computer science was the thing and still, you know, the place where you become a developer, you get a lot of money. And I only right now, after, you know, in the last 5 years that I started to find the artistic self of me, and I can see so many parallels. So every time that I think about something that I feel super scared, like on stage and trying to make jokes, or going to do a keynote speech, or going to, to do like to deliver a message that is a very crucial and challenging message to the team, anything that feels very scary to me, I have this kind of thinking, fuck it. It will be the best it can be, you know? I'm going to do the best I can do, and I'm not going to put myself in a position of overthinking or over-doubting that I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, and that's really good and wise advice. Fuck it.
Right? And fuck it. but that's what all of those things kind of taught me, right? In different ways. So improv, it was all about like being fluid on the way that I communicate with people, which helps me on my podcast, which helps you on things like this, you know, like this conversation. I didn't have all the questions. I didn't have any questions from you. And I'm literally like super impressed with your questions. And I'm putting my brain in a completely different mode here. It's like, how I'm going to explain that? But, you know, I'm doing my best. So hopefully that's going to be a great episode at the end.
It is a great episode. I'm loving it. And really, and actually that whole improv thing is something in that. For what it's worth, I'll share something with you. I actually, not a lot of people know this, but we used to run an event in London called the Tech Off. And it was described as the love child of TED Talks and WWE wrestling.
Okay.
Right.
Wow.
I'll send you some links.
Cool.
It was mad. We had wrestlers, and it was in a nightclub in Shoreditch, and we had like 600 people in the room, and it was like nightclub volume Rocky and all that stuff. So it was like legit speakers, but we wrapped it in some theatre. Anyway, it became ultimately, a friend of mine is a BAFTA-winning film director, and we ended up producing a movie pilot of us doing this show on tour in Austin, Texas, with me dressed as a wrestler with 2 wrestlers on the street.
That's brilliant.
And I had a guy, and it was a proper film crew filming it. And they on day one, they put this big 4K resolution camera in my face and said, "Okay, speak." I'm like, "What?" And literally, I suddenly accidentally became the lead character in a movie pilot because we were doing these stupid events in London, which we don't do them anymore. But I totally get the whole thing. The improv thing was like, I've just got to say some stuff, and some of it will connect, some of it won't. But it's so liberating. And so my point being, for this podcast, 100%, I'm so much more confident now to just stand up and just talk and ask questions the way I feel. I don't plan this, by the way. I don't think of these questions. I mean, I do research about you. I ask you what's in my heart in that moment. And I trust that will come. So the sort of, and that I think is kind of useful for a presentation or a personal development meeting or something like that.
And you listen, and that's something that I've done some drama classes in the past as well. There's a technique called Meisner, which helps you to be very present and listen to the other and respond to what you're listening to. It's fascinating. If you ever want to do something crazy in drama classes, go for Meisner method.
Meisner method. How do I spell that?
Meisner, yeah, MEINSER.
Mine's right. I'm pleased to say I'm testing your English already because you said you were good at it. I'm going to test it. Yeah, brilliant. Well, listen, on that bombshell, we're coming to the end of our time together on the podcast. I've personally loved every minute of that. It's been so fantastic. Thank you so much for my therapy session and insight into your wise lessons from your entrepreneurial career. Where should people find you online and to get your great insight and wisdom?
So you can search for Beta Lucca or Roberta Lucca, which is my original name. betalucca.com is my website. So you can find everything there, podcasts, speaking stuff, everything that I've been doing recently. I'm very active on Instagram and LinkedIn as well. So you can connect with me there. I've been nominated one of the top voices of LinkedIn this year.
Really?
So
I've
been very, very active there, and it's a platform that I sprinkle some excitement to and talking about multi and etc. And so pretty easy to find me.
Brilliant. Well, I would highly recommend everybody does, because genuinely it's really great content, really great insight, really great stuff. And she's a real inspiration. And I'm actually feeling inspired to sort of nurture more of my creative side talking to you. So I'm going to take that from this podcast. So thank you for that. Great to see Beta on the podcast. Great to have you back in listening to the podcast. And don't forget to share us, and I'll see you next time. Do you want to get the top 5 tidbits from each episode emailed to your inbox every Friday? Yes, you do. It saves you having to go through and make notes and make a note of all the books and all the ideas that are in the podcast. We go through and we choose the top 5 we like, plus put all the links into that email. So if you just go up to honeyiblewupthebusiness.com, yes, that's honeyiblewupthebusiness.com, and just enter your email address. There's a little box, just enter it in, and we will send you that information. And it saves you having to make notes and all that. That's make your life a bit easier. And of course, if you did enjoy the episode, please consider subscribing. We are trying to help people through this. So the more people that subscribe, review, rate on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, the more people will see it, and the more we can help. So help us help other people, other entrepreneurs like you. And before I go, I've got to say big up to my company, the tech department, the company we blew up and put back together again. They're generously supporting me on this mission through the podcast. So if you guys want to have a look at a company that can really help you improve your technology, make it better so your business gets better too, boosting your sales and your profit and a bit more sanity in your life, a little less stress, then head up to thetechdept.com, the tech department. My company, give us a look. On behalf of all of us here, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.